Hello, everyone, and thank you all for joining us today to the Embodied Cognitive Science Seminar. Today, we are happy to welcome Dimitris Bolis. Dimitris is a postdoctoral researcher at the Center of Philosophy of Science in the University of Lisbon. Dimitris is interested in the multiscale dynamics of social interaction from both empirical and philosophical perspectives. And today, he'll be presenting his PhD research, which was awarded with distinction by the medical faculty of the LMU Munich. And it's about tracing the social origins of human becoming while redefining psychopathology as interpersonal misattunement rather than brain disorder. Dimitris, thank you for joining us today, and the stage is yours.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much for the kind introduction. Let me share my screen. Do you see my screen now?
Yes.
Perfect. So I'll minimize that window. Great. So thank you very much for the invitation. I'm really happy to discuss and interact with you, both online here and I hope soon also in person. So as it was mentioned, today I will present primarily my PhD work with Leo Zilbach and colleagues in the Max Planck Institute of Psychiatry. So the title of the work is I Interact, Therefore I Am, Human Becoming in and Through Social Interaction. So I will start by presenting our theoretical work, which is deeply grounded in a Vygotskian perspective. Vygotsky has proclaimed almost a century ago, through others we become ourselves. So we will trace this path ourselves too. And I will present here our work on dialectical attunement, as well as on dialectical misattunement. And then I will describe also how this hypothesis can be potentially put to the test empirically. And so here I will describe the methodology of two-person psychophysiology, and I will present two of our main experiments, one on the interpersonal attunement in real-time social interactions, and the other one on the interpersonal misattunement in real-life social relationships. So in the first experiment, we will present how under lab conditions with excellent control, experimental control, we can quantify the multiscale dynamics of social interaction and how this can impact on communication, but also individual behavior and cognition, and essentially save them. And then taking our research out of the lab, we will examine simple way to study interpersonal misattunement in real-life social relationships with a focus on autistic traits. Then we will discuss how these hypothesis findings are relevant to scientific but also general societal endeavors. And we will conclude with our take-home message, which is that social interaction does matter and should be taken seriously when we study human behavior and cognition. So starting with theoretical work, our hypotheses are standing on two core pillars. One is the dialectical framework. So we take dialectics as a evolving school of thought coming from ancient China, ancient Greece, and going through modernity, through German and French philosophy, for example, but also in other contexts, also one can find reflections of this kind of thought in also African Ubuntu philosophy, but also in even more recent philosophical schools of thoughts, I would argue, such as enactivism, for example. And also, on the other hand, Bayesian hypothesis of human cognition and behavior will help us operationalize some of our theoretical suggestions. So just to give brief example to people that might not be very familiar with Bayesian break hypothesis, I'll go through a very simple example from real life. So we have a lady which wakes up late for her work, and she doesn't know what to wear going outside. So because she doesn't have time, her decision is based on prior experience, which in this part of the world, in the south of Greece, at that time of the year, the weather is usually good, so she goes out lightly dressed without carrying an umbrella. However, it happens to rain on that day. So her beliefs about raining probability have been zero. So that's why she decided not to take an umbrella. Next days, the same happens, and already her beliefs have been slightly updated. So she now believes that the probability of raining is 5%. And as the week comes along, she only updates her beliefs enough after 7 days, when she decided to take an umbrella with her, progressively after experiencing the evidence of everyday raining in this area of the world. Then the next year, she travels to Japan, and there again, she has the dilemma whether she will carry an umbrella with her or not. So here she doesn't know about the weather conditions through personal experience, but through social rumors, she believes that the weather will be good enough, so she doesn't need to carry an umbrella. So her beliefs again about raining is 0%, but unfortunately, again, the evidence of this same day was contradictory. So already from the second day, she carries an umbrella with her, and as her belief about raining is 90% already. So why here, for example, we had difference in updating of beliefs about regularities in the environment. One way adopting the Bayesian break hypothesis to think about that is that she has been less confident on her initial beliefs coming from social rumors, so she was more motivated to update. This was just a very simple example, a toy example, to show how such a hypothesis can help us apply certain terminologies in everyday life scenarios, and most importantly, to be able to formally describe these situations, and even constructing competing hypotheses and formally put them to the test computationally. Through the adaptations of the main Bayes rule equation, which I will not go into depth here. However, as one can already observe, our description in the previous example about how humans operate in real life might resemble notoriously the famous Plato's cave allegory, where in this allegory Plato has imagined humans being living as prisoners their whole life without realizing, and instead of really living in reality and interacting, they were seated on chairs and experiencing the world through projections on the wall of the cave of the real objects which were moving behind them. So such a Bayesian hypothesis, if it's taken out of the interactive context of real life, can resemble, can portray life as just as an inference problem, where humans are doomed to only experience projections of real life on their sensorium and just updating beliefs about the environment. Of course, this is not an accurate description of how life operates, and the theory itself quickly adjusted to view two, at least, avenues of being able to adjust the organism with the environment, or what is cardinal to this theory, prediction error minimization. So this theory claims that the ultimate goal of an organism or sub-organism organs, such as the brain, is to minimize prediction error, either through perception or learning, as we saw, but also through action. So, put simply, in my understanding, organisms have at least two main avenues to adjust to reality and survive, at least temporarily. One is by adjusting, an organism can adjust themselves to the environmental regularities, or they can adjust the environment through action. This we can see in different levels of matter organization, from a more biological level to even more social, political realm. However, still in our belief, this framework is still detached from the real sociocultural process. So here we try to situate such computational accounts, which might prove practical, into examining real-life scenarios into a more sociocultural framework. To this end, we lean on the school of dialectics, which emphasizes unity, inner contradiction of phenomena, as well as their movements or change, and trying to overcome traditional dichotomies, such as the organism and the environment, or the individual and the collective, or even who is considered patient in a given culture. And emphasis is given not only in so-called within-level processes, but also between-level processes across various timescales. So here, one can argue that traditionally sciences, but also philosophy, has focused in a given phenomenon on specific levels of matter organization. And we would argue that a more holistic perspective, which would take into account different levels of description at the same time, even in simple paradigms, would be able to depict a more precise picture of reality. Based on such a theoretical analysis, one can see even a human becoming, or the human self-becoming, as a dialectic of internalization and externalization. Here, internalization is taking as the active transformation of bodily and brain structures through others, and externalization as the co-regulation of the environment, especially the social environment, such as the social structure. So we see human becoming and the self as a process rather than an entity. And here one can see both regulation of the environment. For example, when we hold a ball, just by holding the ball, we already, in a way, put simply, we internalize physical laws, because we should indirectly resist gravity and relevant forces. So in this way, we already adjust our internal organs according to the physical laws. Same with the social environment. We try to co-regulate social environment, we will argue, in similar ways as with the physical environment. So here we see, in a nutshell, interpersonal statistical regularities and general environmental regularities that shape multiscale hierarchical structures on an individual level, and vice versa. And this can can be seen in diverse time scales and space scales, from interoception and perception all the way to ontogenesis, culture, and phylogenesis. Our discussion so far, as I have referred before, is heavily leaning on Vygotskian perspective, who have proclaimed that through others we become ourselves, but also on other more recent evolution of such thesis that puts the interaction at the primary spot, such as enactivism and other relevant reflections, such as participatory sense making. And to make this point of this phrase, that through others we become ourselves, I would like to give just a simple example based on the work of Lev Vygotsky. Let us imagine a baby who is still not mature enough in terms of motor action to reach for food when there is an intersubjective imbalance, or in other words, when she's hungry. So in this case, one may imagine the baby extending the hand or even the index finger of the hand, trying to approach the object. And then the caregiver, many times, it's probable that she will help the baby by placing the food closer. So after imagining in a hypothetical scenario, this scenario happening multiple times, either in a cultural scale or in a shorter developmental scale, one can imagine how these interpersonal regularities can transform and take another form in individual brains symbolically, and how an interpersonal action, when transformed into the individual, symbolically denotes just a simple movement of pointing towards an object. So one can wonder why such a highly conceptual analysis might be relevant to research, but even practice in real life. Here we focus on the specific example of psychiatry, and specifically here I will focus on autism. And one can argue that autism and generally clinical population have been studied in contradiction to the so-called neurotypical population as two distinct groups where we were motivated in finding differences and attributing this the difficulties that given clinical population faces into these differences across different levels, from behavior to brain function. One can easily question this kind of paradigm once social interaction is taken more seriously. And here we have suggested that following the interactive turn in neuropsychiatry, one could take into account dyads or groups of people and contrast not only, in fact, neurotypical dyads versus mixed dyads, as it has started happening in the recent years, because still we end up in the same fallacy, namely that any difference or any difficulty in social interaction in the mixed dyads is attributed to the clinical population or the non-dominant population, if we take it in more cultural terms. But here, for example, if we take autism as an example, we suggest we study also purely autistic dyads or groups of people. So here, our hypothesis goes as follows, that if we have a smooth interaction, at least in some levels of description, between homogeneous dyads, such as with homogeneous we mean neurotypical, purely neurotypical or purely clinical population, as opposed to mixed dyads, then we see how the phenomenon cannot and should not be reduced in these levels of description in the individual, but it should also the match or the mismatch of the individuals be taken into account. And this, of course, can take a more continuous expression. So, in a nutshell, in our misattunement hypothesis, we see initial intersubjective communicative gap or operating on the collective level, which leads to increasingly higher differences in individual prediction and interaction styles, which then feeds back to higher communicative gaps if this vicious cycle is not broken. So interpersonal misattunement, in brief, can be thought of as disturbances of the dynamic and reciprocal unfolding of an interaction across multiple time scales, resulting in increasingly divergent prediction and interaction styles and vice versa. And here, the hypothesis holds clear predictions. Interactions within homogeneous dyads are expected to appear smoother compared to heterogeneous dyads. And we have seen in the last couple of years, indeed, a few articles also relevant to the double empathy problem, relevant theory, showing some evidence in favor of this. In our case, we have contrasted, as we will see, similarity in terms of autistic traits and interactional success as higher perceived friendship quality. Methodologically, in order to examine our hypotheses in our research lab, we deploy the paradigm of two-person psychophysiology, that is extending one-person psychophysiology in real-time social interactions. So in our first study, which I will go briefly here, we studied interpersonal attunement and its effects on human behavior and cognition in real-time social interactions. And here, our approach is grounded heavily in a so-called second-person perspective in neuroscience, which Leo Zilbach and his colleagues have been pushing over the last years, where, in a nutshell, this perspective states that neural but also other processes might be fundamentally different in real-time social interactions as opposed to passive social observing situations. Here we use also take inspiration from existing hyperscanning frameworks in order to build our own setup, which consists of a complex network of video mixers, but also video cameras, eye trackers, and other physiological measures and brain function measures in synchrony across two persons in order to investigate formally the real-time social interaction dynamics in different scales, starting from the scale of milliseconds. So this is how our setup looks like. Down left, you see the experimental's room, and up, you can see left the participants' room. So participants are placed face-to-face in this experiment, where they can see each other through the screen. Actually, at the center of the screen, they can see each other, where at the periphery, they can see the real game that they are called to play while they can interact. Here, our main manipulation is that participants, without knowing, they were able to see each other in real time only in half of the game, or in the other half of the game, they were viewing just a video replay of the other person. And here it's important to know that the research so far mostly tackle the question of social interaction and its effects on human behavior through the reverse order. So paradigms usually primed people to believe that they interact in half of the task, whereas people only were viewing a video all the time. So here we do exactly the reverse, and we try to see how the genuine dynamics of social interaction can impact our behavior even when we don't realize. So our experiment looks like that. I will not go here into much detail, but people should make some perceptual decisions and also give their confidence about these decisions. They should actually select where they see the different objects appearing on the screen, when actually in this game we never depict the target. So it's only by chance that the two people can coincide in the same choice. As we said, we will try to see how the two conditions influence the dynamics. Here you can see just a qualitative example, how people interact naturally with each other, naturally in terms of facial expressions. You can see that people are highly synchronized, even at the level of facial expressions. You see that their expressions are synchronized almost perfectly. Here, in a second example, one might notice a qualitative difference. So here you see that people in the actually in the offline condition perhaps feel misattuned, and they cannot, they are not aligned as much as in the social interaction real time. And here we can observe also same phenomena in the gaze of the two participants. Here you can see how we can analyze the gaze following and interaction on the screen, and come to our quantitative results, where we find that in this real-time social interaction, there's a high difference between our two conditions, but also between our offline so-called condition and chance. The same exact pattern we see also on decision making. So that's important to see that how different levels of description can be connected in these situations. But I will quickly move from two-person psychophysiology to two-person psychometrics in order to study also such attunement, misattunement processes in real life. Here, in our second study, we called pairs of friends to the lab to fill out questionnaires about their autistic traits and their friendship ratings. So two people always came who were friends with each other and completed this questionnaire. And what we observe here, interestingly, is that we don't find a significant correlation with a traditional expectation of that individual autistic traits influence individual satisfaction of friendship quality or even duration, at least in the general population. What we interestingly find is that a mismatch of autistic traits or the difference might predict friendship quality and duration in our sample. So the more similar people are in these traits, they seem the more satisfied they are from their friendship. So one here can speculate that the higher interpersonal attunement can lead to smoother social interactions, which in turn can make communication more rewarding. And subsequently, we can observe an enhanced interpersonal attraction between friends or other types of relationships, and then an increased motivation to interact with each other, which increases the chances of interactional success, which could feed back to higher interpersonal attunement. So concluding, of course, our experiments have certain limitations. In the future, we actually have already, after these studies, have already studied the same mechanism through EEG hyperscanning, and in the near future, we are planning to repeat these measurements in Japan with fMRI hyperscanning. Also, we're planning to have unmediated, without screen, in between face-to-face interactions. We also suggest that we should take into account the broader heterogeneity of the population sample, and also further scales of social interaction dynamics can be taken into account, as well as focusing more on clinical studies, as we have suggested, for example, for the autistic populations. Also, at the same time, we quantify facial expressions to also interrelate multiple levels of descriptions of the phenomena at hand. And here is an example of our EEG study and our planned Japan study in the two fMRI hyperscanning system. Also in parallel, we have been putting together computational work where we try to push the field of computational neuropsychiatry to include not only intrasubjective parameters and states, but also intersubjective coupling factors. And here we have given specific examples based on the work of Chris Mattis, for example, and the AGF. And here you can see a more detailed description of relevant processes that could be potentially be monitored and modeled. And in a recent paper under review, just before concluding, we have bring together all this conceptual and empirical work. We have suggesting an overarching experimental paradigm where multiple experiments can be performed in order to focus on specific facets of our phenomenon. For example, here the example is on autism. And one can examine also individually based theories such as theory of mind or social motivation, but also more interactive accounts such as an activist or our dialectical misattunement hypothesis, which always implies the presence of more than one interacting person, and then project our findings through computational modeling into separate multiple parameter spaces, which can be then brought together in one single hyperspace. And through data-driven approaches, we can identify which parameters and processes might be more crucial to the process at hand. And here one can see how naturally the conceptualization of autism spectrum can be turned into autism space, actually, to make more justice to the multidimensionality and the fact that our processes are highly multiscale. So here in real life, one can see that, for example, in psychiatric clinic, in the clinical work generally, or in real life, one following such an approach is not looking for tuning only the clinical population in order to conform to an incidental, in any case, sociocultural norm, but also the rest of the society, and as well as the in-between communication medium. We can discuss this more later. Same logic can be taken into the school, where focus is given on the tuning the interaction between pupils and not individuals. Same in law and ethics. One can, following such an approach, focuses not only on individual responsibility and accountability, but also on more societal collective factors that's shaping our thinking and action. And to conclude, I will conclude with the last paragraph of our work in my thesis, where it's referred, taken together, we argue that social interaction does indeed matter. In fact, we consider the question of social interaction as the fundamental philosophical question. Our argument here is a genuinely existential one. Without social interaction, we do not exist as humans. As we interact to live, and we live to interact. And here I would like to thank you for your kind invitation and attention, and all the people that contributed directly or indirectly in this work in Munich, and especially my mentor, Leonard Zilbach. Thank you very much once again.